Welcome back to the Two Pointers Podcast. I'm Trevor Everett, and I'm back here to talk another Draft Chat episode. You're going to be hearing this a week after it's being recorded. I told Phil here before I get to him in just a second, I told him that I'm going to make sure that that's clear. So if something happens, don't want to be aggregated for this. If we do, who cares? But we're going to talk today about North Carolina prospects. And I want to be clear, when you see the title, that doesn't mean North Carolina, the university. That means the collective group of, yes, there's 18 Division I colleges in North Carolina, but let's be honest, we've done our deep dives and we realize that there are 4 teams, the main 4 that you know of, Duke, UNC, Wake Forest, and NC State right now, that have some draftable prospects, whether it be this year or next year. We're going to talk about a lot of those. This will probably end up turning into a rising and falling segment with some of these Duke guys and stuff, but I'm intrigued about somebody who I've talked to for a while now, never had him on the podcast. Want to make sure that we talk, because we've been talking about this stuff off recording forever, and we want to make sure we get this out there for people. Somebody I trust in this area. We both obviously cover an area in Raleigh. I've been very transparent about living in Tobacco Road, so it's nice to meet people and talk to people I trust. So co-host of the Everything College Basketball podcast and writer for College or House of College Hoops. I always get messed up with the @. Phil Dexter, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing great, Trevor. Thanks for having me on, man. How you doing?
I am lovely. I love Draft Chat because I would love to just convert my show, get rid of the NBA and just convert my show to Draft Talk, but I realize I would lose an audience very quickly. So
I know I'm in that same boat, unfortunately, where it's like, I think I love the NBA draft probably more than like the NBA or college basketball, to be honest with you, but we're probably in that small minority.
I love it because I love having this platform where I can just be like, you know what? Like the example, like tomorrow, I say tomorrow, we're recording this on Friday, January 20th. I'm trying to be transparent about when people are going to hear this. On Monday, before this show even goes up, I'm recording with one of the guys from Pick a Side, and we're talking about half of it because their whole thing is they do, the NFL and NBA, and I don't do NFL on here, and we're going to talk about half of it. I asked him, I said, what do you want to talk about? And he's like, well, he's their like college basketball guy, the guy I'm having on. He was like, yeah, let's talk about the ACC for 30 minutes. And I was like, okay, so I get like a nice warm up for that, which would be cool. And then 30 minutes about the NBA. So it's just nice to be like, hey, you know what? I want to talk with Phil about all this awesome basketball talent in the state of North Carolina. Honestly, within a 50-mile radius, let's be transparent with our listeners, because I mean, Duke, UNC obviously being 8 miles apart, NC State being 15, 20 miles apart, and then Wake being kind of that team a little bit further west when they are no longer in Wake Forest. Long story short, they're all right here in this one bubble, and that's what we're here to talk about. So thank you for coming on. I'm excited to talk. Let's go straight into it because I think it'll be a good hour or so, depending on how passionate we are about some of these guys. There's no particular agenda for the listeners. This is just more about, we wrote down exactly who we thought was worth mentioning to be drafted. So obviously there are some guys that will be late seconds or undrafted guys that will do NBA minutes. But we're going to start with Duke because I think they're the most tantalizing. They're the most poorly coached, and I think that'll just be a great segue to talk about. I want to start with Tyrese Proctor, only because as a guy preseason, I didn't officially do a board, but did have grades on guys and scouted them and understand their potential. I was really high on Tyrese Proctor, and I really still am. I got to see him very close up a couple of times now, and I want to just kind of pick your brain. Where are you with Tyrese Proctor right this moment?
So, as I was telling you before the show, I don't have exact rankings on anybody yet. I just don't feel like it's fair if I haven't seen, pretty much everybody who's going to be draft eligible. So I do have a late first round grade on Tyrese Proctor right now. You mentioned poor coaching, and I don't want to criticize John Shire too much, but part of why we haven't seen Tyrese Proctor live up to his full potential is they're just not using him necessarily in, the ideal ways for his skill set. And that's something I'm sure we'll talk about with Derek Lively as well. But they don't run a ton of pick and roll, which is, Proctor is an unbelievable pick and roll passer. Coach Spins, Chris Spinella did a great video just picking apart his passing ability. He's super good on-ball defender already. He's 6'5", he has a 6'7" wingspan, and he uses that length to really disrupt ball handlers. Very pesky. Has a good anticipation for passing lanes. But going back to his offense, like I said, he has a super advanced understanding of the pick and roll. Reminds me of Josh Giddey in a way. I hate to make that comparison because they're both Australian, and I feel like it's that easy kind of go-to thing. But does have a lot of that same just feel with the pocket passes and stuff like that. So I'm curious to hear where you have him at.
So, as the listeners can find out, it'll be linked below if I can remember. But obviously, the first month here with January, I did a big board of the top 30. And this year, I was super transparent with you and my audience that I did feel like I don't feel like I have to watch 160 people to get to 60, but I think I will get to at least more than 60 and go, okay, I can make a concise understanding by February 1st of 60 prospects and their orders. So my first round only for new listeners here, 1 through 30 was out, and he wasn't in it only because there wasn't enough impact yet. There wasn't enough. Like, I know he's there. Like, I know that he has defensive potential. I'm super excited about him as a defender. I think people are starting to underrate that because of the lack of opportunity, where in high school especially, he was an unbelievable defender, and I hope that he can continue to show that. You mentioned the pick and roll pack. I don't want to beat a dead horse on some of these prospects where it's like, yeah, I agree on everything you said. It's more about the vision and understanding of like how smart he is. And he just seems like a leader on the floor. That was the one thing I took away is I think there's certain things you can get in person versus, not in person whenever you watch these prospects and stuff. And I think there are certain things that you can look at and go, I didn't see that on the film, but I got to see that in person a little bit closer, understand like the game, the speed of it, etc. When he has the opportunity to have the ball in his hands, he seems like he's so bought in. He's such a leader. Very passionate. I hate to use that word because it's just kind of a lazy word, but he is just super, super passionate. And even against NC State, where they were getting throttled in his 12 or 14 minutes, whatever it was in that game, he seemed like he was still there and belonged. I think a lot of guys didn't feel like that game they didn't come up for the moment. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I like Proctor a lot, and I'm hoping that he will be a riser despite the production.
No, and you mentioned the leadership, and just having seen Duke quite a few times in person this year, he's one of the best communicators on the floor, both offensively and defensively during play. But, when they call timeouts, he's one of the most vocal guys in the huddle, which you mentioned, just he's literally, if not the youngest guy on the floor every night, then one of the youngest guys on the floor every night. And so to see him already showing that maturity is huge. I also wanted to mention he has that really good change of pace, which makes his, explosiveness even more effective because he's not a super athletic dude. I mean, his athleticism is fine for the NBA level. It's not going to be a hindrance to him at all, but he's not a guy who's going to, jump out of the gym or anything like that. But the way he's able to slow the pace down sometimes and then just burst allows him to get to the rim a lot off that pick and roll as well.
So obviously my in-person scouting notes are going to be for just one game, but you hit the nail on the head. Verbatim, I wrote, he understood the tempo of the game very well and has great vision. I didn't even look at this. I didn't realize I said the pick and roll part. But he literally the tempo part. I love that he can just control and understand what the moment. Again, they were down a lot in that NC State game specifically, and they've been honestly down a lot in these games and had to fight back, especially that pick game that you were at. They were down a lot and they were up a lot, and then it was just one of those things back and forth, back and forth. He was always able to be in control, whether they were down 12 or whether they were up 12. Refresh my memory, he was the reclass, so he should technically be a senior in high school. I always get him and the other Tyrese mixed up, but I can't remember who's who anymore. Especially when you, like you mentioned, when you watch all these guys and you write them down and God knows what time it is, like last night for me, unfortunately. But, you're writing them down and you're like, oh, wait, I've been watching Proctor this whole time. Got it. Wrong Tyrese on my spreadsheet here. So I just want to make sure I was right on which Tyrese reclassified. And the other one might have at Texas, but either way, Tyrese Proctor is who I'm thinking about. I'm glad.
No, he definitely reclassified. And
so he should be in high school right now. And he's playing really well for Duke, which is crazy.
Yeah. The shooting numbers are a little bit low, but his mechanics are honestly really good too. That's something that I think is just going to come with time. And we see that with younger guys all the time as well. So not a huge concern for me there.
So, and I'm not necessarily saying he's getting it up. I'm not done. That's what I was telling you. The first thing I'm doing when we're done with this is let this process on my computer, hopefully, and then I'm going to try to get this big board. I'm going to try to eat up a huge chunk of the second round tonight and really kind of understand where my 35 to 50 range is, because I think there's a huge drop-off in there somewhere, as you kind of want to look at them in tiers when you're in that range. Like, oh, okay, who I think is going to play some NBA minutes, and I think that's a funny segue. You mentioned him earlier, but let's go and get the Derek Lively conversation out of the way. And I say out of the way because I have been, even on regular college basketball shows I've done on this feed, I have been very transparent about what I thought about Derek Lively and on other podcasts as well. I was super, super excited. I'm trying to make sure that I come out so politely here. I was super, super excited to see the athleticism and the explosion and just some of the stuff we saw in high school. And I saw none of that. And now I'm like, okay, at this point, I'm going to ask you the same question I've asked everyone else. Does he need to do another year and potentially in another system other than Duke next year?
I think the better question is about another system, but I honestly think that I don't think that any other college system helps him out for another year. I think he's a player who's more built for the NBA anyway. But I do think that, again, like we talked about with Proctor, that the way Duke plays has hindered him a lot. I mean, they really don't draw up anything for him offensively. I already mentioned it. They don't run a ton of pick and roll, which is where he's best in the half court. And then obviously, he's a rim runner. He's a guy who you want to get in the dunker spot. He's never, even in high school, been a guy who was a super dominant, like back to the basket, great footwork guy. It's always been about, like you said, the athleticism, the explosion, which I still see from him. It's just really about polishing his game up a lot. There's a lot of like mental mistakes. I mean, even on defense, where he's at least impacting the game some, he just like he doesn't use his length the correct way, which is why he's getting in foul trouble a lot of the time. Instead of using his verticality and going straight up, he gets caught reaching on guys as they go up. And I mean, he has a 7'7" wingspan. He has no reason. If he just puts his arms straight up in the air every single time, it's going to be a tough shot for dudes. Now, Grant, he's averaging 1.8 blocks a game in 16 minutes, which is ridiculous. He's
a great conversion rate for sure.
Yeah, no, he's a great rim protector, even, with those issues. So if he's able to polish some of that stuff up, I think he can be a really dominant defensive player. He's just always going to be a guy who offensively is going to rely on the talent around him. I don't think he's ever going to be a guy that you can just feed in the post and hope that he can score with his back to the basket or even, a 17-foot jumper. He showed flashes of a 3-point shot in high school. I've seen him shoot it in warmups, and it's not terrible, but I mean, he hasn't shown it in Duke games at all. I think he's maybe taken one or two. So that's an aspect of his game that's certainly there, but I wouldn't expect to develop too much more.
So one thing you brought up defense, and I want to be clear. Like I think there's potential on both sides of the ball regardless. Before I make a lazy comparison to how I compartmentalize guys, I want to be clear with you. When I make a comparison to an NBA player, or honestly, even in a situation in college where it was the same system, same type of guy, it is in no way a lazy comparison. It is a way for me to help understand their impact at an NBA level. Like if I'm trying to give you a perfect example. Okay, if Victor Wembanyama is very similar to Bol Bol in a sense, like they both do similar things, length, whatever, right? I am in no way saying Victor Wembanyama. I think he can be a generational player. Bol Bol is not that, and wasn't that when he came out. But length, versatility, the role he can play, the shot that they both have now, apparently, Bol Bol does in Orlando. He's shooting like 39% from three. It doesn't make any sense. But do you get what I'm saying? So basically, those two guys, just so I can go, okay, he's not Bol Bol potential, but that is like how I'm trying to understand his NBA impact.
I totally understand what you're saying. Sometimes I describe it as like almost like a Diet Coke version of.
That's good. Yeah. I like that. Yeah, I like that. So basically, I say that all that long-winded to say that he reminds me a lot of Harry Giles, and they did not run a lot of pick and roll for him either. I think, at least, if my memory serves me correctly, that was obviously a few years ago now. He didn't really fit Duke's system perfectly, the way that team was built, yada, yada, yada. I do also think that he also didn't have a outstanding NBA career, so I am being very careful about that comparison. I want people to not overreact to that. Averaging only 3.9 points in college, 0.7 blocks, 0.3 steals, 0.3 assists, 3.8 rebounds. Good efficiency from the field, but in minimal takes. So the point I'm making is they remind me a lot of each other, and obviously that was a completely different Duke system then, in terms of how I think Shire's impact has been. And again, I don't want to drag him through the mud. I'm with you there. But to come back to earth here, the thing that concerned me a little bit, you mentioned the impact on defense, but it just seemed like he was like out of place more times than he was in place against, especially, and again, I'm only going off the in-person game that I got to see because I think it's eye-opening. Burns made him look silly multiple times within anywhere inside of 12 feet, and it was eye-opening, quite frankly. It was like the first thing I wrote down, and I'm trying to enjoy it. I'm a fan. I'm there watching it, whatever. And I'm just like, man, Lively is getting like just bullied out of position every single time on that end of the floor.
Well, and not only that, you mentioned sort of being out of place. He does occasionally just look a little bit lost, and I don't want to
Bingo.
be too critical, but he's able to make up for a lot of that because he is so athletic. He's so long. And that's why I say I think he might just be a better fit for the NBA game because I do think he has the potential to, switch any pick and roll pretty much with his length. And, he's pretty quick laterally. He's not, I don't want to say he's not Bam Adebayo by any means, but I think he's, just below that level. And then he can also play drop. He, like we already mentioned, he's a great rim protector. So I do think there's some really high upside defensively, particularly at the NBA level, but he's just not anywhere close to what I thought he would be offensively. I mean, there's absolutely no touch around the rim. There was a hook shot last week in the pit game that, I mean, it just should have been money from like 3 feet wide open, and he just completely clanked it. And it's just little things like that that, like I said, worry me a little bit. But I also have a late first round grade on him. And I think I seen you had him, what, 27th?
Yeah, but look, I'm with you. I'm buying into the NBA potential. I just don't think right now NBA teams like that was the question I was going to ask, but I want to, for the sake of time, I want to make sure we hit the last three guys on Duke here. But I mean, do you think he's right now? Do you like? Obviously, if he sat the rest of the year, that's a hard way to ask it. But like, if he continues this play, let's just say that if he stays at his pace he is right now, is an NBA team picking him in the first 30 picks? Obviously, it would be 25 to 30, probably.
I think somebody still ultimately pulls the trigger on him just because of that upside.
Peyton Watson, kind of in that sense. Peyton
Yeah,
Watson was a Denver first round pick, and we were like, huh? Denver doesn't need Peyton? Like it, I guess.
absolutely. I mean, we've even seen guys, Josh Primo obviously had a first round grade from everybody, but I don't think anybody saw him going like 12th to the Spurs.
Yeah.
So
Okay, that's a good
teams
one.
will talk themselves into anything as far as upside goes.
So, speaking of talk yourself into anything, as somebody who is historically, and I say historically, we've only had 30, 60 days sample here, but obviously I've got Dariq Whitehead rated a lot higher than about anyone in the NBA or draft or college basketball space, and that's just the belief that I have in him, and I don't want to spend forever on him because I want to. I want to have a session where I just sit down and watch his film for 3 hours and I'm by myself in a dark room and I just try to understand exactly why I think I have him there again. Because I just think there's so much potential for him NBA wise. I think you mentioned like the thing with Lively was, it's just sometimes some guys fit the NBA better. I don't think that's Dariq necessarily, but what have you seen from Dariq Whitehead? Because this is one of the examples I talked about at the top where we talked back and forth before this, and I was like, we need to get this on a mic in front of, and recorded. So where are you with Dariq Whitehead? Is his stock plummeting for you like everyone else is, or am I warranted to keep him in my top 15?
I think you're warranted to keep him in your top 15. It's kind of a tale of two tapes. If you put on his high school tape, you see all the stuff that makes you think he's a top 5 NBA pick. You see the explosiveness, you see the ability to finish around the rim, you see the confidence. He's just been a different player in college, and I'm not sure how much to credit that to the injury. He is coming off a foot injury, which I think we have to mention, but he's not as explosive, but he just hasn't been playing the same type of basketball. In high school, he was much more of a slasher who would, obviously he had a jumper and, he made plenty of threes, but more of a slasher who would mix in his jump shot, where now he's basically straight up a spot up shooter. I mean, he's taken 50% of his attempts almost from 3-point range, only shooting 33% on those. And he's not getting to the free throw line at all. He's literally lowest on Duke in free throw rate by a significant margin. I mean, him and Jacob Grandison are the only two players under 25% on free throw rate, which is, again, kind of surprising given the player we've seen he was in high school. Now, he still shows, that he has a nice step back jumper. It's just streaky. Everything he does jumper wise is a little bit streaky for me. There's no consistency.
Yeah, I'm buying into some of the fact that like that injury by any stretch, like we even saw a slow start from Cam Whitmore, who I'm not saying that was a similar injury by any stretch. It was lower body, but two different athletes too, in a sense. I'll say Cam Whitmore obviously should have probably been the guy that struggled longer, like versus Dariq, but based on just how explosive and bursty he is. But I'm buying into a lot of I think he's just an unbelievable shot maker when he wants to be, and I think that's what scares me about this. It's like, I can't blame the system for everyone. Like, I can't sit here and be like, oh, it's the system's fault for Lively. It's also, but it is for Proctor too. I can't keep making these same lazy excuses because ultimately I do think he's that good. I do think he's a player that will be an NBA player that a lot of people will be wrong about for a lot of the reasons you've already mentioned. I just think there's a lot of I'm trying to figure out the best way to word this so I don't sound like a broken record, but I think the shot making is really good. I think he doesn't need space to create, but I think sometimes he does get himself in trouble in situations where he might do too much, which I think a lot of people would. But like I noticed multiple times, film and in person, that he would just drive into the lane and then it just seems like he would forget where to go with the ball, and like most of the time it would go up to the basket when it shouldn't have been. There should have been a guy open, right beside him in the corner. It just doesn't. Sometimes you have to look at that stuff with a grain of salt, but I just think there's a lot of impact on both sides of the ball that are really important.
Well, and it's funny you mentioned that as far as him getting to the rim, because one of his better passing aspects in a lot of way is his dump offs when he gets to the rim. But I think that he looks for it every single time.
Yep.
Like, you just, instead of looking for the kick out when it's there, he wants to force that dump off underneath the rim every time. Not necessarily, I don't want to say to be on the highlight reel, but kind of for, that nice looking no look pass type thing. But I do think, again, he's shown that he can be a solid catch and shoot 3-point shooter. We've seen that in the BC game. I think he hit 3 or 4 threes just in the first half alone, all off the catch. It's just about whether that explosiveness comes back for me. And part of it too, and I'm going to be totally, upfront, is I do think he looks a little bit heavier than he looked in high school. I mean, and not necessarily in a positive way. I don't think he looks bad physically by any means. He's just noticeably thicker than he was in high school, and he's, again, noticeably less explosive. So I wonder if maybe cutting 10 pounds off, and obviously coming back from a foot injury, is going to cut down your explosion then. So again, being totally upfront about that. But I still have him top 10 right now, and it's one of those things where until we get to the end of the season and he has just completely shown that he isn't the same guy that we seen a year ago, then I'm still going to buy in.
It's philosophy based too. You and I are in the same vein where it's like, let's give the guy some time. Like, let's give everybody time, because there's people that didn't plummet Cam Whitmore, and he's got off to a slow start, and he still looked streaky as well as an athlete. And I'm giving that example because I have him in that same range. I had him at 3 and 4 from January 1st update, and I will say, like, full honesty, like, Derrick's fallen, but I still have him in the top 10. Spoiler for the audience that was curious. As of right now, that may change as well, depending on some guys around him that have risen up, and some of the Thompson twins have been playing really well. That's another conversation. Let's do 1 minute on Mark Mitchell. I only say 1 minute because I do think he's not going to go this year. It just doesn't remind me of like the Wendell Moore type, where it'll be like, wow, did he just get picked at 25? And hasn't. It just has that Duke effect. I think Mark Mitchell would really benefit from returning to college, just because I think the impact offensively. I think there's some potential from 3. He's only taken 1.5 attempts, but he's shooting 40%, so that's fun. I at least think that some of the mechanics there are good. I don't think he's given the best opportunity in this role. I think they should play him more as, like, let him have some of the ball instead of, you mentioned earlier, they don't run any pick and roll, so let him have the ball, let him be creative. Sometimes they don't give him a chance to do that. They end up giving it to Derrick on the wings and let him shoot. So anything on Mark Mitchell before we hit? I want to end on a positive note, which is why we're going to save Filipowski for last.
Yeah, you mentioned the jump shot, and the mechanics, as ugly as it is, they are not that bad, and they really work for him. And again, I make this comparison sort of in the same vein. I'm not saying he's going to be this player, but you look at the ugly jump shot, the super athleticism, the strength. Reminds me of Sean Marion in a lot of ways. Just that same body type too. I mean, he's your prototypical NBA forward right now, guy who can switch from the 3 to the 4, 6'8", 220. Super strong. That's something I've been impressed with him, is just his ability to finish through contact around the rim has been really impressive. Has an explosive first step, obviously. His thing is just the athleticism. He is an elite athlete out there amongst elite athletes. Like you mentioned, I don't think he goes this year, just because I think there's still a ways to go skill set wise. But if he did decide to go pro, he'd be one of those guys who would get an NBA contract, or at least, a summer league look, just straight up on, physicality and athletic ability alone.
Yeah, there are scouts that just fall right for that stuff, and that's totally understandable, because I think you give him an opportunity in one of those summer league type spaces, he can show he'll have no reason not to show it at that point. Let's end with Filipowski. Again, not too long, just because obviously there's some good conversations we had with the UNC guys as well as Wake, which, funny enough, is pretty much the whole reason this conversation got sparked, was some of the Like, oh, that guy from Wake. Yeah, let's Wake. What they got going on? Because they're winning. One thing I wanted to bring up really quick though, is there a time? Am I missing something where this might be the first time ever that I can remember in my lifetime that all four of these teams have a similar record and none of them are like ranked historically or ridiculously higher? Obviously, Duke was the last one to be ranked. I think as of Tuesday they will not be ranked, but obviously some of that'll change. But they're all good. They're all like, I say good, like obviously some of these teams are struggling, but Duke, Wake, UNC, State, they're all having these. I think they all have in that 10 to 15 win range, handful of losses, weird losses in conference. Without looking at obviously like it's whatever, but it just seems like everybody's kind of like anybody could win it right now. It just feels like there's no like, obviously right now Clemson's technically the favorite, but these four teams seem all competitive, and any of these games could go any direction in the next 2 weeks. As we're recording this, the Carolina State game will have happened. It's happening tomorrow night. We're a week from now. You'll hear this, but am I crazy? Like, did that just like come out of nowhere?
No, that's pretty much the case. I mean, the last time I can really think of all the teams being at least competitive was probably like early 2000s when you had Julius Hodge at NC State, Josh Howard at Wake Forest, you know, UNC right before the Matt Doherty down year. And then, Duke was Duke, obviously, in the early 2000s. Duke was probably significantly better than the other three, but they all at least had something going.
Yeah, no, that's good. Okay. I wanted to make sure, like, it seemed
that
like,
would be the closest, though.
Yeah, I couldn't. Seems like an unprecedented thing, which is what makes the draft part of it fun because it gives us something to talk about that's outside of, like, oh, not just college basketball guys that live here. So, all right. Let's do 2 minutes on Kyle Filipowski because he does deserve it, and the fact that I almost had him falling recently. Let me make sure I'm not crazy. I think his play has been unbelievable. If we're going to take a recent play into consideration on a lot of these guys, actually, technically, as of right now, he has not moved a single spot because some guys around him have risen. So, what do you think about Kyle Filipowski? And I think the way I'll ask it is, what do you think his NBA role is? Because I think he's playing way outside of that right now. He's dribbling the ball a lot. He's taking it full court a lot. Like, what is his NBA role? Is it something we're seeing now, or is it something that'll be different?
No, I'm glad you mentioned that because I also think his NBA role is quite a bit different, ideally anyway. I don't think that you want him really handling the ball much at all in the NBA. I think he's definitely going to be just kind of a stretch four. The question for him in the NBA is, where does he fit in defensively? Because he's not a true rim protector as a five, maybe not strong enough to truly defend, the Embiids, the Nikola Jokic's of the world, but he's probably not athletic enough to guard a lot of the fours. So that's going to be the big question for him, is where he fits in defensively. But I think, he's only shooting 25% from 3-point range, but he's 2 for 20 over the last month. So, that's skewed it quite a bit. He's a lot better of a 3-point shooter than I think we've seen for the most part. He's going to be deadly in pick and pop in the NBA. I think you get him with, a Kyrie Irving, just any elite point guard, and they'll eat you up in pick and pop, especially with some weapons around him. I have him, again, I feel like I'm a broken record here, but a late first round grade right now, just because the defensive concerns are so big for me. He doesn't quite finish around the rim sometimes. He's shown some pretty good post moves, but he's also shown that, if there's any contact around the rim, he usually looks for the refs to bail him out with a call rather than finishing the play. So that's something I'll look forward to improve as well.
Yeah, he's, and I'll end with this. He's definitely... it's been really fun because it's kind of hard to be like, oh, he's playing really well, and let's post this video clip of it, and let's post this screenshot of his stat line. Then you realize like everybody else around him is struggling pretty mightily. So he's kind of been like the exception to the rule. But I do think it is all good stuff. I was going to ask, do you think this is bad for his development? And obviously, I think the obvious answer would be no, because I think he's getting to do things at the NBA level he won't get to do there yet. I have him currently as an NBA. The way I do, and I'm not going to give full context on all these guys, but I have a tab for each one of these guys, the ranking, the height, the weight, the age, all that stuff. And then in 3 ways to compartmentalize it, I put NBA ability or role. What is the one thing that will get them drafted, that will get them on an NBA floor next year in a rookie contract, not G League their entire first 4 years? And I put passing big, because I think, at least in this current NBA, he is a valuable player where whether I don't care if he's on the block for 5 minutes a game or if he's going to be running pick and roll. Obviously, he'll be picked apart on defense, like you said, but I think he will at least be a valuable ball will not stop when it gets to him kind of guy in the NBA. And I think obviously there's way more, but the whole point of that tab is that is the one thing he's going to be valuable for my team. And I still don't have a comp for him, and it's really frustrating.
That's actually a great point, and he's a really good passer from the perimeter and from the post. You mentioned if when he catches the ball on the perimeter, he's quick with his decision making. He has good vision from the high post. So I think that's a really good point that, as a connector and an NBA offense, he's going to be a really, really valuable player.
I'm going to workshop an NBA comp just for my understanding, but I immediately want to go to like Aaron Gordon, but Aaron Gordon's way better than that. So we'll keep going. So let's go down to UNC because this is where I want to have some fun. Plus, for the sake of time, we spent a lot of guys' time on Duke like we probably should have. So obviously, Carolina right now, we talked before this, just for the listeners, this is to know where we are. We currently have Caleb Love, R.J. Davis, Leaky Black, Pete Nance, and then we want to throw in two guys at the end that have been playing really well that are deserving of a conversation for next year more than likely. So I hate to start with the debate, but the Caleb Love, R.J. Davis debate. Right now, where do you fall? Who would be – I know you said the way you do your board early right now, don't feel like you have to overstep anything, but like right now, who do you feel more confident as an NBA player? That's how I ask it.
I feel significantly more confident in Caleb Love as an NBA player. That's not to say that I don't like RJ Davis, and I actually think that RJ Davis may be the better college player, but I just think the physical tools that Caleb Love has and the size are some difference makers. RJ Love is going to be a very undersized guard in today's NBA. Not to say that cannot succeed, but Caleb Love definitely has the advantage from that standpoint. He's 6'4", 200 pounds. He's got the length, 6'9" wingspan. The comp I have for him, we were talking about comps, and I'll be interested to see how you feel about this, is Jordan Clarkson, a guy who I think can come off the bench and give you some scoring. He's not going to be the guy that you want to turn the keys of the offense over to. Has some elite tools defensively, but it's going to be more about whether he's willing to take on the role that he can be successful in the NBA to me. He's not going to be able to come in and be a 25-point-a-game scorer in the NBA. He's going to have to be a guy who comes off the bench, can give you 10 or 12, quick points in probably 20 minutes, and can be a very disruptive defender in the time that he's in the game. That's where I think he finds his success in the NBA.
So intangibles, length, I don't think Jordan Clarkson, obviously we know that body-wise, because Caleb Love has a long wingspan for a guard. All that aside, at least I understand what you mean by Jordan Clarkson, but I think I want to just pick it apart for a second. Not in a bad way. I want you to realize where I'm coming from. So I think, plus, first of all, as a Lakers fan who got to watch Jordan Clarkson for way too many years, I think I've probably lost 10 years of my life because of that. But I think Lakers Jordan Clarkson is the way RJ Davis, I think we've both done that. Or no, I said it right. The way Caleb Love has been playing this year especially, like just how inconsistent and how shot chucking and some of the stuff that I just, that not a true playmaker in any sense, and we'll talk about that in a second, some of the cons, but NBA pro-wise, I'm with you. I think I like the comparison because now Jordan Clarkson and his role I think he's done a really good job of just like understanding what his value is as a pro. I think he was thrown into a really crappy situation in Los Angeles in his early part of his career because he was kind of like, wow, we all suck. Someone's got to take the shots. So he did, and that's kind of where he got to learn from that when he got to play in other roles, and now look at him in Utah being an unbelievable connecting piece to a really, really good offense of a team that should have sucked. So I just think there are things there with Caleb that, yeah, sure, intangibly, I think 6'4" with a 6'8", 9. I'm going to say 8 conservatively. It's probably closer to 9, but it's 6'8" plus wingspan, guard, 200 pounds, strong frame. That's obviously always going to be a better NBA potential than a guy like RJ Davis, who's 6', 160. But RJ Davis has been so much better consistently. You mentioned the college player thing. That's why I wanted to have this debate. The things that Caleb Love do for me at the NBA level, I feel like are going to get him shot out of rotations faster than RJ Davis, regardless of it being 6 foot. I just like what RJ Davis does for me, even if it's 5 minutes a game. Like even if it's the middle of the third quarter or we're up by 26 with 8 minutes left in the fourth. Let's give RJ Davis some run here, kind of like the Warriors do with some of their Ty Jerome type guys. I know Ty Jerome's not that kind of player, but long-winded here to say that I like what RJ Davis does for me better as a playmaker with better vision. The shot mechanic, I really think it is improving. And then obviously I think he's just a better on-floor leader. So where are we? Have we ended up? Is there a compromise, or maybe do I make any sense? I guess would be
No,
my
you
follow up.
absolutely make sense. And those are the reasons that I say I think RJ is a better college player. And I think that
Okay.
Carolina is better when they are turning the show over to RJ more. I think we've seen that last year. Their season sort of turned when they turned the keys over to RJ, and they sort of it's a two-sided offense in a way. It's 50% of the time, let's let RJ get everybody else involved. And obviously he can get his own, I mean, he can break down anybody and get to the basket. He has a great handle. He's phenomenally quick. So I don't think that stuff changes in the NBA. Like I said, it's just a size thing for me. I do think that one thing that you have to give him credit for is he's improved every single year, significantly. You know, he started out shooting 30% from three. He's up to 38%. The same can't necessarily be said for Caleb Love. You know, Caleb Love
Yep.
has regressed quite a bit this year from three. Granted, I do think a lot of that is shot selection versus shooting ability. I think if Caleb Love could clean up his shot selection, his percentages would be a ton better because you know he has as good of a floater as anybody in the nation. He's a a really good pull up jumper. It's the bad. He's taken 7.3 threes a game this year. I mean,
And
it's
like,
ridiculous.
just be honest, like it's 38, 27, 76 splits. The
Yeah.
whole reason I wanted to talk about it was because I really do think RJ Davis. I maybe I'm wrong about this. I want to have this conversation, or I want this to be aggregated in 4 years. But I think RJ Davis will play NBA minutes, and I mean like in a rotation with the team. I really do. I think the 6 foot thing's going to obviously be a huge uphill battle for him. But I think if he adds some weight to his frame, and I think if he's just impactful enough on defense, I just think there's so many good things he's doing for me, at least right now. And I'm that's why I wanted to have this Caleb Love RJ Davis conversation, because neither of us, unless I didn't realize this about you, like neither of us are Carolina fans, so I don't hate either of these guys, right? Like I don't love either of these guys, right? I want to hate them as a State fan sometimes, but I'm not. Like I'm trying to be a media person here. I'm trying to be someone who understands what they're talking about from a basketball standpoint. And I watched that Louisville game, and this is a challenge to myself. I'll give homework for the first time in a long time. I used to give homework to my listeners, like, hey, go do this and tell me what you think on Twitter. That Louisville game I was watching with Carolina friends, and I was able to watch most of that game more than I ever would have chose to watch on TV on a Saturday, because there would have been a lot more games on that I wanted to watch in my house, other than Louisville, Carolina. That's no disrespect to either of those teams, but that's just not the game I was wanting to watch that day. But Caleb Love, literally the entire time he didn't have the ball in that game, they let RJ Davis run the show for that better part of that second half. They were up 20 plus at that point. And the entire time, he would either shoot the ball on the wing without passing to anybody, or he would stand there with his hands on his hips until he got the ball again, or until somebody missed it and he ran the other way. And I want to watch him in a game like, I'm trying to think of what game they just played that was a good impact. But I want to go back tonight, and what I'll do is I'll watch that same thing, and I want to see if he does the same thing against a better competition, because they were up 20. Like, I get it. If you're playing Louisville and you don't want to get hurt, you don't want to run too much in your offense, just stand there. But he does that a lot, and I want to make sure I'm not incorrect on that. And lastly, I want to make sure that people understand why this is a warranted conversation. Both these guys have played 19 games this year. Their points per game is absolutely identical, and that is as of last night at 1 a.m. So the game would have already been concluded if there was one last night. I don't even know if they played last night or not. But regardless, the stats I pulled, 19 games, 16.3 points per game. This is both of them. RJ Davis is out-rebounding Caleb Love. 4.8 rebounds to 3.6 rebounds. 3.3 assists per game for Davis. 3.1 assists per game for Love. And then the shooting splits, like you said, just completely eye-opening. 38, 27, 76 for Love. 44, 38, 87. So I buy into a lot of what I'm seeing, and I don't think it's fallacy from Davis.
And I want to make clear, I do agree with you. I think RJ Davis is an NBA player. At the very least, breaks an NBA roster at some point, and like you said, gets NBA minutes, because he's a very hard-nosed player. He's efficient offense. I mean, you just mentioned the shooting numbers, so I don't want to, dig it up, but a 38% three-point shooter, those guys don't grow on trees in college. As many, three-pointers as they're getting jacked up in college, there's a lot of bad three-point shooters and a lot of inefficient players. So that's nothing to sneeze at for sure. I definitely think he's at some point on an NBA roster.
Yeah, Bones Highland is 6'2", but I don't think he's a tall 6'2", at least whenever I watch him on the Nuggets. But he reminds me, Davis, a lot of Bones Highland. So, and that's semi-lazy comparison, long or short, skinny guy. But I think they do a lot of the same things, and Bones' shot has come around really, really well. All right. Let's just keep the ball rolling, because I don't think we'll spend long on Leaky Black, because at this point, what else is Leaky Black other than a good defender? And then you brought up Pete Nance to me, so I'd like to start with Pete Nance, since those are the last two guys here, and then we'll throw in the Trimble Washington stuff really quick. Leaky Black we'll talk about in a second. Like I said, long, capable defender. But you brought up Pete Nance. So I think there are some concerns. I'm just going to lay out the few things I really think about him, and then we'll just kind of keep rolling. But I think he's super smart. Like, obviously, that's not just a haha, I went to Northwestern, he's a smart guy. That's not at all what I'm saying. I think he's an intelligent basketball player. I think Pete Nance understands basketball IQ-wise. He understands the game at a high level. Obviously, we know he's a good shooter, or at least form shooter, at least understands where to be on catch and shoot. But what is he doing for me in the NBA? Because I think he might be a little slow-footed, and I think there's some stuff concern-wise for me with space separation and things like that. So where you brought up Pete Nance to me, not necessarily any points in Twitter DMs, but you mentioned Pete Nance, and I'm curious why. Let's talk it out.
Well, I mean, I'm probably like president of the Pete Nance fan club right now. Um, so I have a first round grade on him. I know last year a lot of people had him, anywhere I sort of seen between 25 and like 50 before he decided to come back. I really like the array of post moves he has. He can face up. He can score with his back to the basket. He has a nice turnaround jumper, nice little hook shot, can finish around the rim. You already mentioned the ability to shoot off off the catch from three. I do agree with you that he's a little slow-footed. I sort of have maybe the same defensive concerns in a way that I have with Filipowski, where I just think size-wise, but quickness-wise, he's sort of a tweener between a 4 and a 5. And whether he can truly guard either of those positions is something that, going to be seen. But I think he's a good enough passer and a good enough player offensively that, I think this term is becoming kind of cliche, but again, another kind of really valuable connecting piece in an NBA offense.
I think he can be. And last year people were throwing around how good Brady Manick was, and I think that was maybe prisoner of the moment. But people were throwing around him as like, why not a second round guy? Stephen G, my good friend at No Ceilings, like I trust everything he says when it comes to the draft, and we hold each other accountable. He was like, why not throw us, a second round pick in the 50s at Brady Manick? He'd be, a 6'8" wing that can shoot, or 6'8", whatever the people would play him at that point. He would shoot, and he would have long arms and play good defense. But I think Pete Nance, I think we just assumed he was going to show up and do the same thing, and I think he has his own value. And I also think they're not like giving him proper sets. I think he's a good player where it's not the triangle, but I'm trying to think of I guess you would call it like the 45 cuts, but like getting him to a spot efficiently. And we know there's two guys that can pass him the ball easily. Like we know that they can get him the ball. I think he just kind of gets stuck in the corner sometimes. And that was kind of the last point I wanted to make was I don't fall in love with synergy stats necessarily, but as someone who uses it more this year than he ever has, his unguarded to guarded numbers are pretty I'm talking like California to North Carolina wide. Like the guarded numbers are pretty low in terms of points per possession, and the unguarded numbers are like he just doesn't miss when he's unguarded. Like it goes in every time, and it just I think those have to be taken with a grain of salt with anyone. But when you're 6'10" and you're 225, and I know you can do more things for me other than stand in the corner and shoot, I want to hopefully see what. Basically, I want to see the same thing that happened to Brady Manick last year, where they gave him all this time throughout the year to kind of get comfortable in the offense, and then they started running stuff for him, and then he just took over for them and led them to a Final Four. You know what I mean? Obviously, wasn't the entire reason, but he was a huge reason, and I think Nance can be that, and I just don't think they're giving him the proper opportunity just yet.
No, I totally agree with that. And I think that just goes back to the whole Caleb Love kind of holds the rest of the offense prisoner in a way, at least for a certain portion of the game, until they turn it over to RJ 100% of the time, which I think is the way they're going to be successful is I'm not saying to bench Caleb Love by any means, but Caleb Love needs to become the clear two guard for UNC. Let RJ Davis get everybody else involved, and then just Caleb Love gets you a bucket when you need it. That's the way UNC is successful, in my opinion.
So let's do Leaky Black really quick, and then let's talk about Wake because we don't want to spend forever on NC State at the end. My audience would probably click off by now. So with Wake, before we get there, what is the one, and the way I'll ask Leaky Black, I don't have a ton to think about because I want to deep dive him a little bit more. What is the thing that I'm going to ask it the best way I can. We know he's a great defender. He's a capable defender, long. That was like the thing he's always been, right? What is he doing for me if he gets drafted this June? What is the thing other than play defense that an NBA team's going to want from him that he does well? That's what I'm struggling with.
I know I'm at the same spot with you. I have an undrafted grade on him, and he's been a much better 3-point shooter this season. But even from a defensive standpoint, he's long, like you mentioned. He's a very, very good college defender, but not necessarily a super athletic dude, which I think in the NBA, a lot of being a great on-ball defender comes down to being able to stay in front of the best athletes in the world. So that's going to be a huge thing for him. I don't see him as an elite NBA defender. He's not going to be a mismatch by any means. He's not going to be a guy who's bad on defense, but I just see him as an adequate NBA defender. And the offense just, there's nothing there that, as you mentioned, that I see at an NBA level. I think he could be a very good player in Europe for 10 years, or, a G League player for a while. But as far as an NBA roster, I'm not sure that he's that level of player.
I think what we'll do is we'll put a tab on it and we'll chat about it off or on a pod over the next couple of months and just kind of learn some more, because obviously I think I want to buy into him some, and I don't know why. I want to figure out why, but I think he's worth figuring out what his next skill is other than playing defense. And obviously you're right, like the difference in NBA defense versus college is completely different. He's a really good college defender. So really quick, Seth Trimble and Jalen Washington, I really don't have anything other than like they both have shown really, really good impact in their minutes that they've been given. And I think Davis has done a really good job, Hubert that is, for those that might not have realized who I was talking about, Hubert that is. And I think he's done a really good job of giving them the time that they need, as he basically understands that they will probably be back next year no matter what. Washington more, I guess, than Trimble, but both of them should come back next year and be that Carolina guy, stay multiple years. The Nasir Littles of the world are the exception to the rule in Carolina's world, but I think these two will have really, really good impact, especially together. I would love to see them run pick and roll together a lot. I think it would just be fun to watch them pick apart whoever they play next year. But I do think they will be guys that I at least am bookmarking for next year as potential first-round picks.
Yeah, Jalen Washington, jury's still a little out for me. Just he's been so limited in time. These last couple of games, he's looked really good, really stepped up in that Virginia game when Baycott went down. So that was huge for them. But as far as Trimble goes, I think when you look to next year, he's a guy that could definitely be like a 15 to 25 range for me. Just he sort of reminds me of RJ Davis a little bit, a bigger version of RJ Davis. He's definitely not as undersized, but just super quick. I mean, he gets to the rim at will with his quickness. Obviously, we'll have to see the shooting numbers come along a little bit more, but yeah, I'll be excited to see if those guys, as you mentioned, I don't think it's an if they come back. I think they both definitely do come back, because I don't even have Jalen Washington on my board. I think Trimble, would catch on somewhere, but I don't even think he would be a second round pick this year.
Yeah, and that's understood. So, all right, let's do Wake Forest. The whole, again, ironic part of this conversation was these are a couple of just like sleeper guys that we're gonna be like, wait a minute, this guy just got drafted at like 51, and we're like, wait, that's that Wake guy that was really good this year. The more I scouted it, the more I was like, okay, maybe I'll taper some of that expectation. But I think these are good. I think there's some good talent on this team. You've seen them a lot more than I have, especially in person. I don't have them in any particular order, but I just want to be completely clear with you, with everybody, that it's up on the twopointerspodcast.com. It can be read right now. It will be in the link description below, that this was the lazy pick, but I did an article this year of having the luxury of having 18 Division I college basketball teams. I figured, why not try to figure out who the breakout guy for every one of those teams was. I'd say I'm probably about 68% this year on that. There's a couple of stinkers out towards the mountains that I won't talk about. You can go read them if you'd like. But I picked Tyree Appleby because, well, somebody had to score the ball with Wake, and I really thought Wake was going to be a bottom feeder this year. I was not super intelligent on the rest of the team, or ignorant, I guess you could say. But I figured a guy with 4 years of experience in an SEC system at Florida, regardless of how that went and ended. But I thought he was going to be really valuable for Wake and being a shot creator and be their primary playmaker. And obviously we can all realize that was the right answer, because he's 18 points per game, 3.1 rebounds, 6.1 assists. He leads the ACC in assists, 47, 42, 82 splits, and just an unbelievable passer and playmaker and scorer right now for a really good Wake team. So let's just spend 3 minutes on Tyree Appleby and have some fun, and then we'll talk about the ones that are a little more. By the way, I'm just bringing this up as like when he sneaks in as like the 59th player on my board. People are going to be like, really? Like, yeah, I do think he's going to be a really good player next level. So
He's one of those guys where, again, keep making that comparison of great college player, great NBA player, but I think he's very clearly a great college player. And I mean, at a certain point, if I'm an NBA GM and I'm drafting in the second round, like, why not just take a shot on a dude who has already been really, really good versus betting on somebody completely changing who they've been as a player over the 2 or sometimes 3 years that you've seen them. And I think a lot of times NBA guys are just so in love with, upside, that, term that we all hear so much, but that guys like Appleby, kind of fall by the wayside. But as you mentioned, he's been good for 3+ years now, going back to his Florida days. I kind of thought this year personally on Wake that Davian Williamson was going to be the guy who was going to step up, having been in Forbes' system going back to ETSU. I thought he would step up a little bit more, and Appleby's just truly taken on that dog role and super fun to watch. I mean, gets to the rim whenever he wants to, basically, but the acrobatic threes the guy makes. I mean, he makes some threes coming off screens that are just unbelievable, man.
Yeah, I hate to be lazy and say Kennedy Chandler, but he does remind me a lot of Kennedy Chandler, but he's also a better shot creator and he's also a better playmaker. And that got Kennedy Chandler drafted in the first round last year. So,
And I think he's a much better shot maker than Kennedy Chandler was. I
and
mean,
that
the
comes with the
straight
territory.
up difficulty of the shots he takes are phenomenal sometimes.
And for those that want to be ignorant and say that like it's because Wake's not good, like Wake has 4 quality wins on their resume right now. At least the way I do quality wins. Obviously, the NCAA tournament committee might have a little bit better things to say about that or worse things to say about that. But he does rely on like he's very, 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 very right hand dominant, and I don't think that's a problem. But I'm gonna say right now there are less. The way I did these notes for this for visual sake for me is I did a regular type font in my positives, and I did italics for my negatives of these guys. Way less italics. Like I'm like blown away by the production, and he honestly the breakout thing was obviously partly a joke to bring it up and be like haha, but I think he's exceeded my expectations as a breakout guy. Like he's been the best passer in the ACC statistically, at least in terms of assists per game. His teammates are making those shots more than most other guys that are doing that. Obviously, Terquavion Smith is a top 5 or 7 guy in the ACC in assists per game, and some of his teammates aren't making those shots sometimes. But as an example, he's just an unbelievable player as a whole, and I think that experience in college, like you mentioned, taking a flyer on a draft and stash type guy versus like, why not just let Tyree play in the G League showcase and then like, oh, he's going to play a few, I'm trying to think of a G League team, like let him play for the Swarm for a few years and then like, oh, okay, like yeah, or not even a few years, like the first year, let him play for the Swarm, let him have some fun, continue to show what he could be made of. But I do think he's a really good player, whether he's an NBA player or not. Like I just think he's got too many valuable skills that I don't think. Like teams are probably not going to draft him. Let me just be upfront with you and the listeners. Like he will not be drafted probably. But as someone who I'm an evaluator, just like anybody else doing this. Obviously, I'm not doing this professionally, but I am an evaluator, and what I like and what he offers, there will be a reason he probably will end up in the final 5 picks of my board for right now. And I like everything I've seen from him. So, anything else on Tyree before we touch on the 2 that I think are worth the conversation right now with Hildreth and Monsanto?
Yeah, just we've mentioned guys having long careers in Europe, and I think Tyree's one of those guys that we look back on in 10 or 15 years and is like a Euro League MVP, and just not only as a pro in Europe, but has one of those like ultra successful careers over there just because of the type of player he is. And maybe that doesn't fit into a role in the NBA, but I agree with you. Just a really good basketball player.
All right, who do you want to talk about more? Who are you more passionate about, Cameron Hildreth or Damari Monsanto?
I think I'm probably the only person, at least I'm the only person I can find talking about Damari Monsanto, so we can start there. And
Well, good
it's
because I don't have a lot because I like watched everything last night. I wanted to really be. I actually even I have receipts on this. I messaged you last night right before I was. Actually, I stayed up a little while. I wanted to make sure it wasn't too late in case you were going to bed. But I had mentioned how I was watching Hildreth and Monsanto, and I kept accidentally being like, man, what a pass by Tyree, and I would write a note down. Like I was like, so it was really fun to like, I had to focus. Like I had to be like, okay, the 6'6" guy, 225, shooting 42, 40, 85. That's Monsanto I'm talking about there. I have less to talk about him just because I think he needs. I think it'll be fun to watch him the rest of the year through the rest of the ACC. It's only going to get harder from here, and I think I'm intrigued what you have to say, but like I want to see what he is outside of being a catch and shoot guy.
Well, let me make very clear that I don't think he's a star in the NBA type guy. I just think that there's a very clear-cut role for him, and that's important. I think when you're drafting in the NBA, there's kind of two schools of thought, and I think some people think that you should be shooting for the stars with every pick, and then I think other people realize that like your chances of getting that guy between, maybe 15 and anywhere else basically are not good, and so you need to find guys that can really step into roles. And I think Monsanto as a 3 and D guy, like I feel like he could play 3 and D in the NBA tomorrow. um you mentioned it, he's already shooting 40% from three right now. He's taken 7.3 threes a game out of 9.6 total attempts. So you mean he's basically just shooting strictly threes. But again, you mentioned 6'6", 225. He's got the body, 1.3 steals a game. He's very strong. So he shows being a pesky defender on the ball, but he's pretty good in the post as well. Um, I fell in love with him during the UNC game when I watched him in person. Just again, not he's not like LeBron James athletically, but when you see him in person, he definitely stands out as a guy like, oh, he's a little bit different than everybody else, just size, quickness, all that good stuff. And then I've seen these flashes from him in isolation scoring. I sent you that little clip. Um, just a little behind the back move, and he doesn't do it a lot. And they don't ask him to do it a lot because they do have Appleby, they have Hildreth, who we're going to talk about, they have Davian Williamson. But when he gets the opportunities, he shows flashes to be a decent isolation scorer. I by no means think he gets drafted this year, again, because I just haven't seen him on anybody's board. I haven't seen him on anybody's radar really, but I think that he's a very clear 3 and D guy in the NBA, could play for 8 to 10 years, and just, one of those guys that probably not signing for a max contract at any point, but catches on with some nice veteran minimum contracts.
Not that Duncan Robinson is a good comparison, but Duncan Robinson is a guy that can, and he's similar size, right? He's almost 6'8". I think he's 6'7", somewhat 6'8". At the time, he was a very good shooter. Obviously they've pulled him in and out of that rotation 60 times. I'd be mad by now, but he got a 5-year, whatever it was, for like 5-year, $95 million contract, which was the most ever for an undrafted guy. So, or second rounder, whatever the heck that contract was. I forget it at this point, but he reminds me of him a lot. Like, I think there's a significant, obvious role for him. Like, honestly, I may call this now. Like, I think he'd be a perfect pick for the Heat because they already like these kind of guys, right? These longer, can do some other things, but we really buy into what your exact value is for the Heat and that culture. And I think he'd be an awesome fit for the Heat. I really do. And I'm just throwing that out there as like I disagree on some of the isolation stuff, because at least some of the stats would tell me that he shoots 27% from isolation right now. But I agree with you. There are flashes. There are things where I'm like, oh, okay, wait a minute. He's not just a guy that stands there and claps and goes, I'm ready, I'm up with the ball. And then all of a sudden he makes it. Because, by the way, he's making everything. Like, he's in the top. I looked at it last night. I didn't write it down. I'm so mad at myself. And there was a catch and shoot metric I had looked at, and he was in like the top 2 percentile or something like that in catch and shoot efficiency. And I was like, okay, that's just stupid. Because, like you said, those earlier, you said it about somebody. It was like those kind of, you said it about Davis, those 38% shooters in college don't grow on trees. Well, they don't, but Wake's got a guy. Apparently, they found him on a tree somewhere because he's just shooting and making everything. And I really buy into the form. Super quick release, doesn't need a lot of space too. A lot of these, like Leaky Black defended him a lot of those times in that UNC game, from what I saw, and just didn't need. 6'8", Leaky Black, and maybe 6'10", 6'11" wingspan, and he didn't care. And by the way, I had him listed at 6'6", but that just, it was late last night, so I might have missed that. Is he 6'8" or 6'6"? I don't know.
No, 6'6". If I said 6'8", I misspoke.
Okay.
No,
Either way, because I think 6'8" would be really we'd be talking about him a lot different if he was 2 inches taller. I really do.
Totally.
And I don't want to sit here and drag him through the mud, because I think I'm with you on some of that stuff, but I think I'm just completely more bought into the shot than anything else. And you know what? If a team takes a flyer on him in the second round, or even undrafted, I think he will fight his way onto an NBA rotation. Again, calling this now, I think Miami Heat would be an unbelievable fit. Just be Max Strus, be Duncan Robinson. Those are 2 guys that are right now on an NBA team that will make the playoffs this year.
I think his stock would benefit tremendously from obviously coming back next year and being more of a primary piece in an offense that doesn't have Appleby, where he can maybe show some of those things a little bit more. And that's not to say he would ever be a first round pick, just because I'm not sure that skill set is there. But as of right now, I think he's an undrafted guy. Whereas I think if he came back next year and could have a very productive season, you could see him sneak into the second.
not that a lot of teams, like I'm not an ageist by any stretch as an evaluator, but there will be teams like at that point. I think he redshirted his freshman year, so that would be his third year playing technically, if I had it right.
Yes.
Again, it was
Yep.
late last night, so I'm just trying to be making sure you're holding me accountable there. You, I forgot now because I'd said this, but you alluded to somebody about coming back without Tyree. Oh, you mentioned somebody coming back without Tyree Appleby there. I think the guy that would benefit the most from that would be Cameron Hildreth, which is, I think, a beautiful segue. So we'll end with him on Wake. I think Bubby Clement's worth at least a mention at the end, but we'll get to him. So Cameron Hildreth, I was super impressed. I will be completely upfront with you and everyone listening that I was not just watching Cameron Hildreth film where I wasn't zoned in on him every time Wake played. But I'm super impressed. In 19 games, 13.1 points per game. Jeez. 6'4", 195. I didn't mention that. 6.3 rebounds per game, 2.9 assists, 48, 30% from three, and 76 from the free throw line. And he does rank in the 78th percentile, which is pretty good, or 78th percent, whatever you want to call that, in points per possession as a ball handler in pick and roll. So I think that obviously that's eye-opening because his primary point guard, playmaker, whatever, is their pick and roll ball handler, and he's still ranking in the top, 25% or whatever that metric ends up being. He's still in the top percentage or top quarter of the country in pick and roll ball handling. So I'm very, very impressed by what I've seen in that limited role. I think he attacks the basket really well. I think he's a good finisher. The shot mechanics scare me, and that's where we can talk for a few minutes to just kind of figuring out where do you see the biggest jump for him next year?
Yeah, well, part of what I like about him is projecting the improvement because he already improved so much from last year. Goes from a guy last year who only averages 3.9 points a game, 1.2 assists, just under 3 rebounds, and a little over 13 minutes. You already mentioned his stats, but so I think that he's one of those guys who we can project if he does come back, and I assume he will, just based on again all the boards and everything I've seen. Haven't seen him around anywhere. That you can project him to continue to work on those things and kind of work those kinks out. What I love about him is just kind of and again, I feel like we kind of guys get pigeonholed, especially sometimes, white guys with the, hard-nosed label or whatever, but he makes all those little plays. He's a great rebounder for a guard. He averages 6 rebounds for a guy who's 6'4" on a team that, isn't necessarily lacking size. And he's still able to get in the mix on that. He has 1.3 steals a game. Again, just pesky defender. Really strong was the thing that I was impressed with him. He shows some offensive post game. I I feel like not a drafted guy, probably even after next year, but again, just one of those guys that's going to find a way to play professional basketball because he does all these little things that help you win.
He reminds me a lot of TJ McConnell, and I hate to sit here and say I don't like comps, but then, like, again, I tell you that I try to find a way to compartmentalize their NBA role. I think he's a pretty good defender. I think where he'll really find his impact at the next level, just being a general high energy guy, is really fun. Like, just he's never, even when he's not making shots and he's mad, like he's still into the play the entire time. And he has one of the best floaters and runners in the country. Like, I really do, and that's not me overselling him here on a draft show, but like, I really do think he's got one of the best floaters and runners in the country, at least of guys I've evaluated. Obviously, somebody's going to sit here and clip this and go, oh, but what about this guy for Middle Tennessee State that has this percentile floater? And I'm be like, shut up, leave it alone. I think in the ACC or in whatever we're talking about in this grand scheme of things, I think he is a very, very good inside the paint guy. Again, attacks the basket really, really well, knows how to split defenders. I think he's going to end up being a better team defense player than on ball, but then again, that's also just what if he just next year comes out and has a really, really good, I mean, I'm not going to say I won't have him, as a draftable player next year. I think he can be. I think a couple extra pounds to his frame too would be kind of nice. I think there's a lot of things I could sit here and list them all, right? I've got a ton more notes on him than anyone else, but in this Wake team, but I just really enjoy watching him, honestly, is sometimes just a big takeaway. Like, if I enjoy watching you, there's probably something I'm going to find eventually and write down and go, yeah, second round pick or 58th player on my board or whatever.
And kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum of like a guy we talked about, with Lively who looks lost on defense, Hildreth doesn't ever look lost defensively, or he always looks like he knows exactly where he's supposed to be. You mentioned sort of a better team defender than probably an on-ball defender because he's always in the right place. And it offensively, his teammates always know where they can find him as well, which seems to definitely benefit him. And from a timing aspect, you mentioned the passing, but he's really good on the lobs with Marsh too.
I think that is a testament, team defense wise. I think it's a testament to Coach Forbes too. Just because he has those guys bought in, and I think that's a big reason why they're winning. Is yeah, they'll go through these stretches like they did against, I think it was the Rutgers game, where like both teams just couldn't score for the first like 12 minutes or the last 12 minutes of the first half. But it was okay. They hung around and held Rutgers to nothing, and Rutgers held them to nothing, and they eventually got that win. I believe it was either close or whatever. I was watching the film last night. I don't remember now. But either way, that kind of game is my point where like I think he's impactful on both ends of the floor, whether they're needing him to be one thing or the other, which I think at that point, my biggest thing with NBA skill versatility is, okay, yes, it's awesome that you can do 6 different things, but the one, like, I'm okay with that. Like, I think he'll be able to find something, and I think right now that will be a capable team defender and a quality shot maker. And what I mean by that is being able to drive, being able to kick, being able to know what he's doing with the ball, which is why I think next year, if they give him the ball and let him kind of figure out some playmaking crossroads, I guess we'll call it, I think that would be really, really fun to watch. So anything else on any of these guys before? And I don't really, honestly, I'll just say this about Bobby Clinton before we keep going. I think there are some measurables there that are really fun, 6'10", 225. The stats are not anything there to be desired. Definitely decent burst with the ball, but just want to give a shout out to Stephen Gillespie for the article on Bobby because he's seeing something, and I think he's going to be right. I think he's going to end up being a good player, but I'm not going to go there yet. Anything on Wake before we keep moving?
No, and I sort of have the same impression of Bobby that you do. You see those flashes occasionally where you're like, wow, this is, what this guy could be with that 6'10" frame, but it's not put together yet. It's a lot of imagining what he could be.
Which is what we're doing with Baba Miller right now, another ACC guy, and they kind of remind me of each other, and I'm not trying to be lazy, but I am a lot higher on Baba than I am Bobby Clinton, so we'll see what happens next year. So let's end with, and this is going to be more of the floor is yours, and then I'll talk about Jarkarl Joyner for a few minutes, but I would like you to just, obviously you mentioned you don't have any order or anything like that, but I have Terquavion Smith currently ranked at 9th on my board, and I want to be completely transparent with the new listeners that, yes, I am an NC State fan. That is not, I don't hide that, okay? However, as a guy last year who had him as a late first-round grade regardless, I had him as like the 29th prospect last year until he, literally the last like month or whatever, decided to go back to school. I had to completely change my board there in that range, and ultimately ended up to a point where I was like, okay, if he improves on-ball defense next year and continues as a playmaker that we were seeing at the end of last year, then this kid's going to be a lottery pick. And been to half of the games they've played, obviously. So that's a lot of sample size in person. And the kid is starting to play really good on-ball defense. And I make the Bones Highland comparison earlier. I think a lot of people are going to make that comparison for him. Super skinny, 6'2", 6'4" type of guy. I don't think that's the best comp for him, but I do see it. And long-winded to say that his on-ball defense has definitely improved. I have seen it. It has worked really well against some tough guards in the ACC, and even before, obviously, playing against like Kansas. And I think the shot making is just absolutely, like, I didn't think it could get better, but obviously any guy can improve anywhere. And my God, can this kid just score in any way he wants right now? And I'm buying into every bit of what the NBA teams are going to want from him. So that is it. If you haven't heard my opinion or read anything on him, that is totally fine. That is what you need to know for right now. There's a lot more we could spend an hour on, but I would like for you to talk about Terquavion Smith so I can hear a fresh perspective.
Well, full disclosure, I had him as a lottery pick last year, so I was already very high on him. Before he obviously pulled his name out of the draft, I was probably one of the higher people on him if he had come out. Not quite as high as you probably this year. I have more of a lottery grade on him than the top 10 pick, so I would see him probably somewhere. When I say lottery grade, I know the lottery I think is technically the first 14 picks. I kind of say anywhere between 10 and 20 is a lottery grade for me because, it's such just, throwing darts at a board who's going to get picked in that range.
Anybody can go that we currently have ranked 20. Anybody can go into that range.
Exactly. So yeah, I would have him in that 10 to 20 range. Super crafty scorer. That's what I really like about him. He's a good athlete. Again, not gonna jump off the page at you athletically, but nothing that's going to hinder him at the next level. But we mentioned it with Proctor, and it's probably my favorite part about Terquavion Smith, and even to a further extent, is the way that he changes pace, especially with his drive. I don't say that he's going to be this type of player, but it reminds me in a way of the way that Gilgeous-Alexander gets to the rim in just a very like herky jerky stop start. Terquavion has all that kind of same stuff. He has range, within the building. I literally in my notes it says, shooting ability from deep in all caps, because some of these threes he takes are 3-4 feet behind the college three. They would be a couple feet behind the NBA 3-point line. So I don't think him adjusting to the NBA 3-point line is anything that you need to worry about. I don't see him as an elite playmaker. I know that he is averaging 4.7 assists per game, but that's just to me more of an effect of how high usage he is in that offense. I don't project him being a guy who's going to come in and really be a elite playmaker in the NBA. I sort of project him in the same mold of Caleb Love in that I think they're going to have to be a bench kind of microwave scorer, but I think that Terquavion can be a much better version of that. His defense needs some work, but I think that's really just more about him growing into his body a little bit more. He's still just so thin that, as he gets that strength, I think he's going to become a better defender, be able to stay in front of guys more. And I think also as he gets stronger, he's going to become a better finisher at the rim offensively. And so I think just some of the growing into his body you project, but I really love Turk. 6'6" wingspan, so the length is there. He has the tools to be a good defender, which is obviously very important to me.
Super quick feet too. Can stay in front of anybody laterally right now at the
Yeah.
college level.
Yeah, like I said, really the weakness is just the weakness. He's a buck 65 right
Yeah,
now.
I like
He's
that.
got to get to like 180 pounds, I would say, ideally, probably to be where he wants to be in the NBA, at least to start. But he's got to get a little bit more efficient scoring the ball. He's shooting just under 40% this year. But again, I think a lot of that is just a product of him being so high usage in this offense, which he's not going to come into that same role. So I love Turk as a guy that could really step in on a contender and give you, 12 points a game probably right away off the bench.
Confident too. Super, super confident. Good grief. You mentioned the range from the parking lot, but or in the building. But my question, and we can get closed up here shortly, but who does he remind you? Because I mentioned the Bones Highland thing, and I think that's just lazy. And I that's lazy to anybody that has said it, and I've said it, and I'm just being transparent. But who right now in the NBA, or even past before, who does he remind you of? So I'm struggling with this. That's why, and I've seen the kid more than anybody, I feel like.
I'm struggling with it too because, like you said, the Bones Highland is lazy, and I feel like I kind of go there with any smaller, kind of skinny guard who has that electric scoring ability. I really don't know. I don't know that there's a guy
Is it Malik Monk?
Malik Monk, or I was going to even say Jamal Crawford light. It's hard to say anybody's going to come into the league for 20 years and be an elite sixth man, but I could really see Terquavion Smith being in that mold.
I like it. I'm workshopping.
And he kind of has that same.
Yeah.
He kind of has that same body type as Jamal Crawford too, thin and long, wiry.
I think Jamal is maybe a slightly taller, but that would be probably the only thing. Yeah, no, and this is less about okay, this is the guy we're looking for right here. But I wanted to just talk out loud because sometimes whether it's on a pod or whether it's when we hit stop recording and then we're like, you know what, light bulb, that's who it was. I think these conversations are valuable as evaluators. So let's do this really quick. I only want to bring up Jarkel Joyner because I think it's funny that we brought up this theme of guys where we were like, okay, we talked about earlier, RJ Davis, if he doesn't have an NBA role, will be really good overseas. We talked about who else was that earlier? Good grief, I'm already forgetting. Tyree Appleby obviously would have a really good role overseas, that kind of thing. We talked about a couple of those guys. I think Jarkel Joyner will be a pro somewhere. I want to say somewhere because obviously being 6'1", 180, can rebound well for a guy of his size. I'll just read my excerpt pretty standardly here. State's second leading scorer. This is from the in-person scouting at Duke, even though I've watched him all year in person. But Jarkel shows how he can be a difference maker with things outside of scoring, even though he's the second leading scorer on the team, which I value if you can do other things, even at your size. Being 6'1", he had 6 rebounds against Duke. He had 9 assists, which we know he's a capable passer, playmaker. Guys are making shots too, which really helps him. But the part of his game I wrote verbatim. Part of his game I have always liked is despite being 6'1", he knows how to be impactful and in the right place defensively. has a high basketball IQ and helps him with playing passing lanes well and getting steals. I don't have him as a draftable prospect currently, but he provides great effort and smooth shot, which is two things NBA teams love. So, any thoughts on Jarkel Joyner? I guess I don't really have a question for you, but it's just like here's my thing about him.
One of the things I'm most impressed about with him is just how he gets to the line as well. I think that's something that, not enough people value, but NBA teams do put a lot of value in. And he gets to the line almost 5 times a game this year, but over 3 times a game for his career and even in limited minutes sometimes. So, doesn't sound like a ton, but 5 times a game is, a decent amount, especially considering he's not necessarily the motor that runs this offense. Turk is getting so many of the looks. He's obviously, you can see the difference with this team though, and having another guard who can take some of the ball handling duties away from Terquavion Smith and help him out. And because Terquavion isn't the kind of guy like a Caleb Love is where he needs to score on the ball either. Terquavion is a very good off ball shooter. And so I think having Jarkel there has just opened up that part of his game even more as well.
I think they are the perfect match right now for each other. Also, they look like they love playing with each other. I think this whole team as a whole has been the fun part to watch about them. Is just they seem like, I'd mentioned to my buddy, obviously both of us fans at that Duke game, but I was like, this team just like, I have these flashes when this is homework for whoever wants to do it, and you, if you'd like, that Duke game, when they came out of the second half and they made whatever it was like the 12-1 run or 12-0 run, I had these like fever dream flashes of like this team beating two teams in March. Just because of the way they played, the way they came out and dominated Duke, at least in that few-minute stretch. It's just the way Jarkel impacts the game throughout that whole process was really, really fun to watch, and they benefit each other really well, him and Terquavion. Let's hit Casey Morsell really quick. You mentioned you like a lot of the things that he brings to an NBA offense before we started recording, or NBA defense. So where are you at with Casey Morsell, the former Virginia guard?
Yeah, I mean, just sort of the same place I'm in with Monsanto. Obviously, they're a little bit different players. Frame wise, Casey Marcel's significantly smaller, 6'3", maybe like buck 90, 200 pounds. But I think Casey Marcel can be a very good defender in the NBA. He's already shown, being I don't want to say necessarily elite defender at the college level, but a guy that you can trust to take on the other team's best player on ball. His shooting numbers have improved significantly, as we ended up talking about before the show a little bit, but he was not very good at Virginia, and this year he's been one of the absolute best shooters in the country, which I mean is one of the reasons he left Virginia, and he talked about it openly, is he wanted some more freedom offensively. That didn't necessarily come to fruition last year, unfortunately, and I think a lot of people maybe dropped expectations too quickly on Casey from where he was, going into his freshman year at Virginia. But I certainly think he's an NBA guy, probably like a late second rounder if he were to stay for next year, and again get an increased role with Terquavion, I'm assuming, leaving, maybe being able to show some of the more ball handling duties and stuff like that. But
yeah, my main notes were obviously strong on ball defender and decent wingspan. It seems like I don't technically think we have that officially. I'd love to see what he measures at the combine, because I think he'll end up measuring bigger than 6'3", whether it be height or width. But the ACC 3-point shooting percentage thing, like, I'm going to be very careful because I think it's good. I think the form is there. You could definitely tell he's worked on it, which is why I was hopeful. Obviously, yeah, the jump and having more offensive freedom is nuts, but just statistically, it's almost fishy that it went up that high. And I'm like, okay, maybe that's just a product of the placement in the offense, but I am hopeful, and I agree with you. I think I would teeter back and forth between who I like better between him and Joyner, but I think they both bring something outside of their scoring to an NBA defense or an NBA offense that I'm really excited about. So whether they play in the NBA or whether they're pros in general, I think they both can be, and they both are capable. So, all right, really fast, let's do this. I hate to do this because it's over an hour now. I don't want my computer to implode. We both attended the John Wall Holiday Invitational. So obviously, for those who don't know, really quick, that is I like to think it's one of the biggest, if not the best and biggest high school tournament in the country. I can't think of any on top of my head that are bigger or better, but maybe I'm just naive. I think it's the best tournament in the country. There is literally and I don't have it right now in front of me. It's in my case on the other side of the desk here, but there was a 50th anniversary this year poster that they gave out or program or whatever it was. And there were literally guys all the way back to like Bob McAdoo played in this tournament. Like that is just nuts to me. Like, it blows my mind. Anyway, guys like that, 50 years of NBA pros consistently across the board playing in this. We got the chance to see. I was there literally for one day, unfortunately, but you obviously got a chance to see some other guys there with the McCains of the world. But I really enjoyed seeing Wagner play, and then you and I both. That was where we picked up chatting about basketball again from last year. Was Aaron Bradshaw. So again, did talk to me about John Wall for a few minutes, the Invitational, and then just thoughts on Bradshaw, because I think that was what we kind of took away from it. We're obviously getting ahead of ourselves. This is definitely next year's draft talk, which we'll definitely do another time. But just air out the John Wall conversation. I think it was really fun. I had a great time.
Yeah, I had a fantastic time. Thank you to the people at John Wall for having me, first of all. But I mentioned to you after seeing Camden that night that I think Aaron Bradshaw to me could be the early favorite to be the number one pick in the 2024 NBA draft. He just has those kind of like unicorn qualities as far as a guy who, as far as I can tell, is legit 7'2" when you stand next to him. I mean, he is an absolute monster of a human being, but he moves more like, a 6'8", 6'9" forward. Showed flashes of a jumper, even out to like 20 feet, I would say probably. Really good defensively, had a few nice blocks, but he was probably the player I was most impressed with day one. Team I was there to see day two was Combine Academy. Absolutely loaded with some local guys. Silas Demery Jr., who used to play for Millbrook High here in Raleigh, friend of the ECB podcast, friend of mine, headed to USC. He had a nice game, but Raquise Passmore is a very impressive prospect from them. He visited Duke the other day. But yeah, I had seen a ton of really good players. Dylan Harper was there. There was just a lot of elite talent. You mentioned seeing that program and all the guys that have been there in the past, and then just looking down the rosters of this year and sort of projecting like, okay, who are our future top 10 picks? Who are our future lottery guys? Like, there was just so much talent. It was a great time.
Yeah, it was my first time ever being in an environment like that, and it's just sad because obviously that history and that building, for those who don't know Broughton High School, we're not going to turn this into a rally podcast. We can do that another time, but just for the sake of time. But Broughton High School is a very historic building. When Press Maravich was coaching at NC State, his son had to go to high school somewhere, so Pete Maravich came and played high school ball at Broughton High School, and I just love that. And that's like my favorite fact in the entire world. I tell everyone that who talks basketball with me, just because it's really neat. He's in the backyard. But yeah, got to see a lot of great teams here locally. I really enjoyed it. I'm going to go watch some more Millbrook too. Like you mentioned Millbrook, I literally can see the Millbrook school out my window. So like I'm a little biased. They're my home team per se when I'm living up here. But I really enjoy some of the talent I got to see, even in like some of the 4-star prospects, right? Like that video clip I've got of Billy Richmond was, I don't think I could have timed that any better. Shout out to, I guess, me and the guys around me. We were trying to get video clips of Wagner dunking while we had him on that side of the half. And I mean, I got to walk away from that game and go, I'm with you. Everything about Bradshaw I agree with, and I think there's some talent there, and it's no coincidence that Billy Richmond got like 4 offers in a span of like 2 weeks after that like stretch of games there. He's been playing unbelievable. I guess lastly, I would say Combine Academy. Shout out to Patrick and them at Combine. They most of their staff followed me on Instagram like 4 days after the tournament, so I appreciate them. They're doing a lot of really great things, nationally ranked here out of North Carolina, up near Charlotte, and I think they're building something really, really strong, trying to be competitive in that type of basketball space in high school. Obviously, your Oak Hills and your Montverdes are going to be, or Montverdes, whatever you say, are going to be kind of that poster child. But Combine's doing a really good thing and focusing on both sides of athletic and academic, and they're doing a very good job of it in a pretty small sample size for them. I think they've only been open a handful of years, if I'm correct. But either way, Combine's been doing a lot of great things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you're right. They've only been open a couple years, but they've just been super competitive at the national level. And even just, I mentioned it in an article I wrote, but they warm up and prepare like an NBA team. They really do. It's unbelievable.
Beautiful to watch. It is. All right. Well, we can talk about that more. We'll do a segment of next time of like some of those guys with 2024. Just for the sake of time, I want to make sure my computer doesn't implode trying to get this file together. But get your plugs in, everything. People can find you. It'll also be on the screen as well for the majority of this YouTube piece here, as well as it'll all be linked in the description below. Plug away, talk about where people can find you, any upcoming work, things like that, and then we'll get out of here.
Yeah, I co-host the Everything College Basketball podcast. We put an episode out pretty much every Sunday throughout college basketball season. You can also find my work at House of College Hoops. And then I'm on Twitter at Phil_Dex Sports. So can usually find a lot of the links to my stuff there. And appreciate the time and you having me on, man. Have had a great time.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for, as I've told every guest the last like 3 weeks, because I keep telling an hour and then we talk about basketball and we all, as fans and as evaluators and as media people, we talk longer than we should. So thank you again for coming on. Don't forget 2 pointers in your cart. WEnergy.com, as well as link in the description below for 10% off your order of W Energy products. 2 pointers on most social media platforms or 2 pointers podcast. I think that's everything. I hate to do my plugs like that quick at the end, but want to make sure I still mention them so I don't forget. On behalf of Phil and all of the things he represents, I'm Trevor Everett. This has been the 2 pointers podcast, and we'll see you later.